it seems as if America is embracing the idea of any other as an enemy. And with that, in combination with guns and the rise of violence, these attacks in America, it's very disturbing. The book burning, the tendency among states to try to limit women's rights to control their bodies, to be in charge of themselves. It's just very disturbing. I want more people to be out in the street protesting. I want more people to be talking about what freedom actually means in America. But people seem to be too comfortable. I think of three stories when I think of what people's on-the-road experiences. I think of the man I met in Tallahassee, whose father was a great civil rights activist. And his father was this legend. He was driving down the road, stopped at a service station, and wanted to use the bathroom. And the guy under the hood said to him, "The bathroom is there, it's available, but they just don't want you to use it," because the attendant said, "No, it's not available." And so when he asked and challenged the attendant in a very gentle way, another white driver came around and slapped him and said, "We don't like your kind around here." And that was pervasive during that period of time. White service stations did not have to give you gasoline at all. People would tell us stories about being stopped on the road by any random white people in southern states, because if you passed the car too fast, if your car looked too new, if your car looked too old, white people had the right to challenge you on the roadways of America, and you as a black person had no choice but to accept it.
So I know there's another story coming because you mentioned there were three, but let's just stop on that point. I mean, that is just extraordinary, isn't it? That it was a legal right for a white person to be able to call out a black person for simply being there, not indicating in time, not having a brake light, just being in the road in front of them.
Exactly. And they would spit on people's tires if your car was too new. They would scratch your car if they thought that you had too much money. You had to be very, very careful. The third story was of a lady in Montgomery, Alabama, and she told the story about her father driving down from either Detroit or Chicago. And as a sheriff passed, they were told to look away, not look at the car, because black people couldn't look at white people in the eyes. And the father kept saying after the sheriff passed, "I have a bad feeling about this. I have a real bad feeling about this." And eventually he turned around in the rearview mirror and he saw the sheriff coming, and he decided to gun it. So he had an 8-cylinder car, and he pulled as far ahead as he could, and then he slowed down and pulled off the road so he would leave no dust. And they pulled behind the church, where they sat and waited for the sun to go down. And the sheriff went up the road and down the road, but never thought to look behind that black Baptist church where they were hiding.
Sometimes, thank goodness for religion,
Yes,
Alvin.
yes,
Yep.
yes.
And there are many, many more stories in the book. I was really touched as well by the policeman who bought himself and his family a new Cadillac that had a CB radio.
Oh, yes, yes.
And that's extraordinary, isn't it? Because he got to hear over the CB radio what white folks were saying about him.
Yeah, they were driving to California, and he got on the CB radio, and he told them that he was this brown and beige, I think, Cadillac. And his wife got angry at him because she said, "Don't tell them. They'll recognize you, and we could be in trouble." And then they had heard something about a warning that there was a sheriff ahead. And he said, "Did the sheriff, I think they called them Smokies. They called them Smokies as in Smokey Bears. Did you see the Smokey ahead?" And the person on the CB radio said, "No, all we see is a bus full of, I forget, yard monkeys or something like that." I had never heard that term at all in my whole life. And he said, yeah, that's the type of stuff that people said on CB radios in those days. Very pejorative.
So put this into context in terms of time as well, because we're talking about a time way past civil rights legislation, aren't we? But we're still in the era of Jim Crow, segregation, and that kind of long tail.
Yes, people think that all of this ended with the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But it continued many years after that, because although the law changed, human behavior did not change. Even in the village where I grew up in the Florida Panhandle, it was still de facto segregation for years and years after that. There were things you did not dare do because you did not know what reaction it would provoke. I think outside of America, people often saw, oh, the changing of the laws is going to be a new America. And many black people thought the same thing. I think of Hank Sanders, who was the first African American elected to the Alabama legislature since Reconstruction. And we're interviewing him. And he said he thought that in 10 years, everything would be fine. And I said, if Martin Luther King were here today, what would you say to him? And he'd say, Dr. King, I did not know you were talking in biblical years.
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty to talk about, and hopefully we'll make time for it during this interview about the current state of race relations in America. I was fascinated as well just about the importance of the car. It wasn't something that I'd really considered, but it is hugely important, isn't it, in Black American history?
Absolutely. As you moved from the rural South up north and you took a job in the automobile industry fee, it meant for the first time you were earning a wage, a living wage, and you could pay the rent and you could save money to buy a car, and the car gave you freedom. You were, for the first time, the captain of your own ship. You could drive past those hotels that wouldn't let you stay in them. You could drive through those sundown towns that would not let black people be in them after dark. It gave you freedom. When I was growing up, there was an ironic side of this. A lot of white people said, oh, black people waste their money buying all those big cars with those big engines. Why don't they buy practical cars? And in doing the podcast and writing the book, I said to people, think about it. You couldn't stay in hotels along the road. So you wanted a big car. So if you had 2 or 3 children in the car, they could stretch out on those big bench seats in the back of the car and be comfortable. If you need to lie down, you could lie down. But also you wanted to have that power behind you, that horsepower, so that if you got chased like that lady told us about in Montgomery, Alabama, you could get away. That was really important.
And there are some lovely details. I loved the bit about the kids having mini urinals in the back of one enormous Cadillac or something. I do think that's quite brave, and yes, I'm not sure it caught on really, Alvin, in a wider sense. Jane and I were just mentioning the sundown towns. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sundown towns developed in America to keep black people out of the city limits, and they really came into a big phenomenon in the 40s and 50s in America. And most people think that sundown towns are a phenomenon of the South. They are not. There were more sundown towns in Indiana, Ohio, even Michigan than many southern towns. And these were places where, as an African American, you got caught in the city limits after dark. You could be harassed. You could be put in jail. In a southern town, a guy said that, I think it was a town called Duck Hill, that his father told him about a black man who was in town after sundown, and he was tarred and feathered. So a lot of the police harassment would happen if you were caught in sundown towns. And again, they're still around.
Well, I was going to say, which decade are we in now?
Yeah, the sundown towns still exist in America, except they're softer now. If you happen to be in some of these places on Long Island or in California or in some of these Midwestern suburbs, you'll get stopped. Hezekiah Jackson in Birmingham told us a story that he drove a guy out to a suburb outside of Birmingham. And as he dropped them off at the church, the guy was a workman at the church, and he pulled away. The police came as if coordinated, 2 from this side, 2 from the left, 2 from the back, and 1 from the front. And they asked him, what was he doing in this neighborhood, right? And that was, in effect, a sundown community, because they wanted to know, why was this black man in this neighborhood? And he said he just wanted to get out because he was clearly not welcomed.
This is Times Radio.
where it's 9 minutes to 4. It's probably 9 minutes to 4 where you are too. Alvin Hall is our guest this afternoon. We're talking about his book, which is called Driving, the Green Book. It's also in podcast form as well, which is a beautiful mix, actually. It's very nicely done. Very nicely done.
I also read the audiobook.
Oh, gosh, so much of you. Alvin, tell us a little bit about your own story, because you are a remarkable man.
I was born in a small village in Florida, and I was lucky to be raised by parents who really gave me freedom. They had no expectation for me other than to get an education and go to school and go to church and be a good person. But all those things stayed in me. And so when I went off to college, I didn't go to college with the idea of having a career. I went with the idea that I was going to learn something and figure out what I was going to do later on. And then at various stages of my life, I would teach school, I worked in a department store, I did whatever I could until, I always say, luck came my way. And luck came my way in the form of a job on Wall Street, teaching about finance, when it's something that most people wouldn't think, oh, what would he know about that? It turned out I was really good at it. And I enjoyed it so much because the financial markets are not just about money. They're really about a form of creativity, creating products and investment methodologies that will appeal to people. And then being in London on a holiday, I met somebody in the photographer's gallery who said to me, Alvin, you should be on television. And that led to me doing Your Money or Your Life, which is how you and I met.
Yes, we did meet all those years ago.
All those years ago.
I don't want to over-romanticize your own story, Alvin, but let's not do it down either. I mean, it would be fair to say that your family really didn't have very much money.
We had no money.
At all.
Yeah, my mother never earned over $3,700 a year.
So for you to then go to college and then to Wall Street to live in the glory that is Manhattan and to do all the things that you do. The first time I met you, you'd just got off Concorde.
That's right. That's true. That's so true.
I mean, it just is quite a journey, isn't it?
It is quite a journey. And I think that the road trip to write this book really taught me something about Black love for their children. Black parents really protected their children against the evils of racism. There's this wonderful story that this guy at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham told me, how when he would walk down the street and a white person was approaching the family, his mother would distract him. Oh, look at that church steeple over there. And then she would step to the left of the child to put herself between the child and the white person so he would not accidentally run into the white person. And I remember that waltz walking down the street with my own parents, and how that love, and your parents protected you. They didn't tell you about how evil it was going to be because they knew there would come a day when they couldn't protect you. But that freedom gave me ambition. It gave me the trust and love of people. And it gave me the ability to treat people as I would want them to treat me. All of that is a part of the person that I grew up with.
So what on earth do you make of what's happening in your country now?
I find it very disturbing that the tendency of the country seems to want to roll back to a time that didn't really exist in the way that they imagined that it did. They forget that in this old conservative Make America Great Again, that there was oppression of women, of people of color, of anybody who was different. It seems as if America is embracing the idea of any other as an enemy. And with that, in combination with guns and the rise of violence, these attacks in America, it's very disturbing. The book burning, the tendency among states to try to limit women's rights to control their bodies, to be in charge of themselves. It's just very disturbing. I want more people to be out in the street protesting. I want more people to be talking about what freedom actually means in America. But people seem to be too comfortable.
Why hasn't, and this may seem like a naive question, and I think sometimes we are naive, as you've said, when we are observers, outside of your country, but why haven't the Democrats managed to harness that very powerful feeling about freedom and about the American dream and about the freedom that should lie within that dream. Why hasn't that message overturned the nastier side of the Republican movement?
I think the Republicans are much more skillful at grabbing the narrative, grabbing the language, and co-opting it and shaping it to their ideas. I think a lot of the Democrats don't want to be so frontal, don't want to be so brutal, but I think it's getting to the point that they're going to have to be. They're going to have to bring in those wordsmiths, those people with emotional intelligence about language to help them shape the language, not to be nice, but to talk about the truth that's being distorted by the other side at this point.
Do you think that Joe Biden should run for president again? I mean, he would be, was it 84 by the time he was in the middle of that term?
That's a tricky question because who else is there? Who else has stepped forward who wants to take on that job? At least, even at 84, he would have the courage to take it on and perhaps stand up more than others would. It's a brutal job these days when you look at how the Senate is treating him, how they talk about him as an old man. There's a level of disrespect. There's a level of dismissiveness there. Look at how they stymied Obama. Look at how, although he had a lot of popular power, he was very much aware that as a black man in government, if he reacted in certain ways, that it would be turned into a decided negative. It's a hard job to take on the Republican Party at this point, but someone has to. Someone needs to have the courage to do it.
What do you think of Elon Musk? And I ask you that because you're a man who's invested quite a lot in tech over the years,
yes,
and presumably done quite well,
yes,
out of it. What do you think Elon's up to? What's his future?
I find it fascinating that Elon Musk, who is, I think, a first-generation American, is so conservative when what enabled him to build the fortune was not conservative values. It was an openness, a generosity, an idea that your idea deserved to be heard and given a chance. But it seems as if now that he has made his billions, he doesn't want to give other people chances. He wants to turn America back into a world in which he is now king of the hill. He isn't that struggling guy. What if he had failed? What if things had not turned out the way they are?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at his rockets that keep on going up and failing, and somehow that's regarded as a success,
yes,
it's Emperor's New Clothes sometimes, isn't it? Very expensive ones.
It's all about the spin.
It is, isn't
yes,
it? Alvin, what a pleasure to see you again.
It's a pleasure to see you.
Let's not leave it another 20 years.
No,
but,
exactly.
Driving the Green Book is Alvin's book, all about the Green Book, a road trip through the living history of black resistance. Jane's read it too. We both really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a really unique piece of history that is very deserving of everybody's greater attention. Lovely to see you again. Enjoy your time in our country.